Hello and welcome to this Dot Connector videocast for subscribers to davidicke.com. Well, of course, the news has been dominated this week by what happened in Las Vegas at the Mandalay Hotel, with nearly 60 people dead, hundreds injured after a mass shooting from a man named to have done it alone currently, but we don't know that, called Stephen Paddock. And the response to it from the media has taken a depressingly predictable sequence where, first of all, the event happens. Then there is an official story of the event which unfolds piece by piece. And then the media take that official story as solid gold truth to forever be the history of that event, and just repeats it and repeats it and repeats it and repeats it until the population in general accept that that is actually what happened. And I was out walking this week, listening on the radio, on the earphones, to the BBC coverage of the aftermath of Las Vegas. And the presenters and the interviewers were just going down the tired and predictable reactive lines in response to these events. And as each new element of the official story was given, it was taken to be true. And this process goes like this every time. First of all, the police or the authorities say this is what happened and this is the background. And at the first reporting, it might be said, police say, or the authorities say this is what happened. But very soon, the authorities say and the police say, it disappears. And it's just, well, that's the way it was, without question. Now, I'm not saying for a second that everything we're told by the authorities is not true. I'm saying that we shouldn't take it without it being questioned and standing up to analysis so that we can say, actually, yeah, they are telling us the truth here. And then you've got not the alternative media, elements with the alternative media, that whenever something like this happens, they're immediately rushing to judgment. It's a false flag, it's a hoax, it's a this, it's a that. Within minutes, an hour, 2 hours of it happening. And both responses are ridiculous. First of all, the job of a journalist, mainstream or other, is to question official stories, official narratives. That's their job. Otherwise, we are entering the level of extremes of naivety, in that we're accepting that when the authorities say something happened, it happened. Weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And so these official narratives need to be questioned, not just accepted. Okay, this is what the police are saying. This is what the authorities are saying. Now let's see if it stands up. That's the job of a journalist. And from these elements of the alternative media, it's also the job of a journalist to calmly, maturely, dispassionately look at the evidence before making a judgment. Because otherwise, you are discrediting that great part of the alternative media that does actually do that and has made a fantastic contribution to human understanding of the world by doing that. What we can say at this point is that there are many questions still to be answered about what happened in Las Vegas. And we should be looking at these and ticking them off if and when they are answered. Okay, yeah, okay, that explains that, that explains that, that explains that. Now, it's not necessarily always the case that you can explain everything, like why this guy apparently by himself decided to do this. But you can look at many questions that could be answered and ask why they're not being. Here's just a few relating to the horrors in Las Vegas. First of all, how come that Stephen Paddock is 64-year-old, apparently a millionaire real estate owner and former accountant. He has no history of crime, gun violence. Many say, from their knowledge of him, he may have been doing it secretly, but from their knowledge of him, he never talked about guns. He never seemed to have any interest in guns. And somehow this guy ends up in Las Vegas in a hotel room with all those weapons, apparently, with the aim of mass murder. Now, there's a massive question that needs to be explored. How come that could happen? How did he get the guns into the room without being seen with so many bags? One of the things I look forward to is the video footage of him doing that. Now, at the time of this recording, no video footage has been released. It might be. But if it's not, then there's a big red flag. There's a fantastically enormous red flag. So we look forward to seeing not just the odd picture, but detailed video footage of Paddock at the hotel, because by their very nature, Las Vegas hotels are absolutely awash with video security cameras. They are everywhere. It's been confirmed that at the Mandalay Hotel, there are hundreds of security video cameras. So if Paddock was there for a few days, he must be on lots of them and lots of the footage. And if he was taking guns up into his room, then he will be on the video doing that. So let's see if those videos are released and made public, as they have to be to give credibility, any credibility to the official narrative. Because if they're not, well, why not? Now, like I say, they may be, and that will be good to have that confirmation. But if they're not, well, why? Paddock's brother was, if you saw the pictures on the mainstream media, he was visibly shocked to the core by the news of what his brother is said to have done, because he said there was never any sign that this guy would ever do that. His girlfriend, who was in the Philippines at the time, said she had no idea. She called him a kind, caring, quiet partner, and who never said anything to me or took any action which she ever understood as a warning of what was to come. Now, people do flip. I mean, I'm not sitting here saying all the official stories are a load of rubbish. I'm saying there are many questions yet to be answered about it, and we shouldn't let those questions pass until they are answered. How did a 64-year-old non-athletic guy, non-athletic lifestyle guy, summon the strength and the firearms skill that experts say he had to have had to do what he did? Where did he learn to handle weapons like that? Which, in terms of the ones he said to have used, is far from easy, the experts say. And why did he take so many weapons into the room when so many of them were completely unsuitable for doing what he was planning in terms of killing so many people so far away? What was the point of that? Who was the woman who told members of the audience 45 minutes before the shooting started that they were all going to die? That is taking coincidence to quite extensive proportions, to say the least. So that question needs to be pursued, and I'm sure they are pursuing it. Genuine police officers are pursuing it. But it's another question, a big question. What is the background to the receipt that has come to light that shows that Paddock ordered room service on the 27th of September in that room, which is the day before the police say he checked in, and the receipt records 2 meals for 2. So who was the other person? And why did it take 72 minutes for the police to storm the room from the time the shooting started? Why did it take 72 minutes? When again and again there are cases of the same Las Vegas police response turning up in minutes to calls of someone with a gun who wasn't even shooting it. There's an Iraq war veteran, which you will see circulating on the internet, story relating to him. His name's called Chris Bethel. And he says he gave the police the exact location of the shooter because Bethel was just below, so a few floors below the room where the shooting was coming from. And Bethel said that he gave the exact location to the police. So he said, we're looking in the wrong place. But it was an hour after he gave them the location that they actually turned up at the door. And then say they found Paddock dead from suicide. And Bethel said it felt like it took them too long to get over there. It does seem so. To take him out, to get him, and it's actually eating me up inside. Now that is a major, major question that needs to be answered credibly, not just answered credibly. And, you know, there are so many questions to answer, and we must not let them pass without being answered. And there's another area that should also be taken into account whenever these things happen, and that is the power of mind control. You know, this is never addressed, this never talked about. When, you know, movies like The Manchurian Candidate are not just fiction, they're based on fact. I studied mind control, both sides of the Atlantic, for a decade. And the programs that are used to create killers and many other personalities in people to do what the authorities, what's known these days as the deep state, want them to do. And I can tell you that programming someone to do what this guy did is a piece of cake these days. Creating mind-controlled assassins, etc. Piece of cake. And I'm not saying that Paddock was mind-controlled to do this. I am saying it's a question that should be taken into account every time. Because if we don't, we're just allowing the official narrative to become official history. And, what's the line the police use? Move along now, nothing to see here. All over, get on with your life. Well, some of us want those questions answered, and we'll go on pursuing them, and so we should. So, when you then come to the question that always must be asked whenever these situations happen, terrorism of any kind, who benefits? Who benefits from this happening because of what they can then justify to change society in the way that they want? Now, I've been talking and writing now for 3 decades about the plan to turn this world into a global, centralized, Orwellian military police state. And I say military police state because the military and the police are planned eventually to fuse into one global force. And the idea is to create as many excuses as possible to justify that happening in stages, what I call the totalitarian tiptoe. And when you look at the police in Britain, for instance, as they were when I was a kid in the 1950s, and then you look at the police now, you look at the police in America, you look at the police in most countries, they're becoming more and more and more like the military in the way they look, in the way they operate, and in the weapons they carry. And so if you want to introduce a more and more extreme police state and move the police more and more to the military, if you want to destroy privacy, if you want 24/7 surveillance of everything, then are we really saying that they've just got lucky? That people suddenly start going crazy with guns and engaging in terrorist acts around the world, in Europe and America? We're just a bit of luck. Oh, crikey. This is what we want to do, and they're giving us the excuse. Are we that naive? More and more people are not that naive. And they're starting to ask questions they weren't asking before. So if you look at each one of these attacks, whatever the background, what follows is more surveillance, more destruction of privacy, more power to the police and the security forces as we move along totalitarian tiptoe down this road to the global Orwellian authoritarian state. And then look at it in its totality. Look at all the terrorist attacks of recent times, all the people going crazy with guns of recent times. Put them all together, and they have in their totality been used to transform society, in terms of control and imposition. And, you know, the totalitarian tiptoe, where you start at A and you're going to Z, but you know if you go in one leap, then people will say, what's going on? So you go in steps. And each step is promoted as not connected to the other steps, so you don't see the pattern. So what happens? It's like, I've described it like this. It's like you push a gate and you see if you get resistance. If you don't get resistance, you walk through it and you go to the next gate. Now you push that. If you don't get resistance, you walk through it and you go to the next gate, and you're moving on and on and on and on. And what is happening with these attacks is that they're justifying the increasing police state, and then they move on to the next attack, and they push through that, and they justify another advance of the police state, and so it goes on, getting more and more extreme. And the benefit of this, or another benefit of this, is that people kind of get used to it. They get used to what would have horrified them before, and now it becomes part of life, and they get used to it, and other generations are born, and to them it's normal, so you don't get the same resistance you would have had before. And this is what we're seeing. For instance, a friend of mine, Richie Allen, sent me some pictures this week of a Neil Diamond concert he went to at the Manchester Arena, of course, where there was that horrific bomb attack. And there are people going in to watch a music concert, going through airport-like scanners. And the point of targeting places where people have previously felt safe, like music concerts, like shopping malls, schools, etc., is to stop people feeling safe. Because when people don't feel safe, they look for the authorities to protect them from what they fear. Therefore, do what you like, because, I'm frightened. Richie was telling me, he was saying to people in the queues to go through these scanners at the Manchester Arena, well, it's terrible, isn't it? What's it come to when you have to do this to go and see Neil Diamond? And one of the responses was, yeah, I know, I don't like it, but we've got to protect us from the terrorists. And that's exactly the perceptual state that this hidden hand wants us in. So we agree to its totalitarian tiptoe to ever greater extremes of imposition. And this is where we've got this week. Passenger reading aloud from Bible causes panic on London rush hour train. Train passengers forced open the doors of a carriage and climbed onto the tracks Monday morning after a religious man sparked mass panic. In the wake of a weekend of terror in which 58 people were killed in Las Vegas and 2 women knifed to death in Marseille, commuters in Wimbledon were on edge. A man began to read aloud from his Bible. Fear spread through the crowded carriage outside Wimbledon Station in southwest London around 8:30 a.m. local time. Spooked passengers forced open the train doors and, quote, self-evacuated the rush hour train. Emergency protocols were engaged as the rail network cut the power to the tracks to avoid injuries. Now, that's where this continual process of violent attacks and terrorist attacks have taken people, which is just the state that the hidden hand wants people in, so that the population will accept their impositions on the way to the global totalitarian state. Now again I ask, is this really just coincidence? Of course not. And I heard from a British police anti-terrorism officer in the last few days that in these conferences that they attend, which are secret, and the what's discussed is not to come out. He said that they're discussing putting scanners, like airport type scanners, at the end of streets, particular streets, so people can't come in and out of the street without going through the scanner. Now, that might sound fantastic, but that's where it's leading. I keep saying to people, if you don't like what's happening now, then just think on, because this is what's happening now. It's not where it's meant to end. It's meant to conclude with levels of total control and surveillance that even Orwell didn't think of. And the more attacks there are of various kinds, the more excuses there are to push this on. Another area which is diverting people from all this that I'm talking about is the desire to exploit every one of these attacks to justify some political end. We've had the left in America blaming the right. We've had the right blaming the left. We've had CNN and Newsweek exploiting the attack to demonize white men, when most of Paddock's victims in Las Vegas were white people. Ridiculous. But the key thing with all these diversions is to simply hold on to this question. When these attacks happen, who benefits? And invariably, it's those that want to advance the totalitarian global state. And here we have another story this week on the same theme. UK wants to jail people for years for viewing far-right propaganda. The United Kingdom is responding to its severe terror threat with a proposal of lengthy jail sentences for anyone who views terrorist content online. Specifically, sentences of 15 years in prison for such an offence. But what might constitute terrorist content, this article asks, quite rightly. According to the British Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, that concept includes far-right propaganda. I want to make sure that those who view despicable terrorist content online, including jihadi websites, far-right propaganda and bomb-making instructions, face the full force of the law, Rudd said in a statement. But here's the question. Who decides what constitutes far-right propaganda? The authorities do. And when you control the definition, you control the law. Because when you're saying far-right propaganda, you're putting in the public mind, oh yeah, they mean Nazis, yeah, quite right. But as we've seen again and again and again and again and again with anti-terrorism laws, they are worded, A, that they can be applied to people who are not terrorists, and have been, and B, the context is not defined. And if you control the definition, you control the law, which is what this is all about. And we've had a glimpse in the last few days of where this is meant to go in terms of this totalitarian military police state in Catalonia, where we've had um, absolutely extraordinary levels of violence by military uniformed Spanish police, beating up young people, old people, to stop them having the simple, basic human right to vote the way they see fit. And the European Union has failed to condemn it. In fact, this guy, what's his name? Franz Timmermans, European Commission First Vice President. They love their titles, these people. EU Parliament defends proportionate force after brutal Catalan referendum crackdown. EU members have the right to use proportionate force to defend the rule of law, this is Timmermans said, 3 days after hundreds were injured by Spanish police trying to stop an independence vote in Catalonia. It is a duty for any government, this man said, to uphold the rule of law, and this sometimes requires the proportionate use of force. Now, here we have the context again. Here we have the definition again. Who decides what is proportionate? They do. So is proportionate beating up people, beating up young, old people to stop them voting? Is that proportionate? Apparently it is. This is where it's going. This is where the totalitarian tiptoe has always been leading. And we're just now seeing the glimpses of even more extreme levels of it as they push through these symbolic gates. Respect for the rule of law is not optional, it is fundamental, he said. Who makes the laws? Oh, they do. Who has to obey them, whatever they are? We do. Or maybe we shouldn't, if they are destroying basic human freedom. And we're seeing the militarization of countries now, more and more. And this week, this man, I find it so hard to say, but I have to, unfortunately, because it's staggeringly true. Michael Fallon, who's the Defence Secretary in Britain, he's announced an expansion of cadet units in state schools across the UK, claiming there is evidence such schemes boost social mobility. Shut up. You are seeking to shuffle people, kids, into the military mentality and into the military. Sir Michael said he had approved 31 new units across the country, and the first in Wales, as part of the Tory drive to increase the number of cadet forces in state schools to 500 by 2020. Of course, in America, military involvement on an ongoing basis in schools is bloody massive. They're recruiting kids from the youngest age. The aim of a cadet army force, he said, is to instill a series of values and standards. I'll come to them in participants, including courage, discipline, integrity, loyalty, and respect for others. There are currently over 400 cadet units across England, but only around a third are stationed in state schools. According to the Department of Defence, the cadet units will be focused on schools in areas of high deprivation and will include the first unit to be approved in Wales. I'll just decode that Orwellian language. The idea is to manipulate poor kids into the military to fight wars started for the benefit of rich people. And for those poor kids with white faces to then kill and be killed in conflicts with poor kids with brown faces. That's basically what's been happening year after year after year. And we have this grotesque response by authorities to horrors like Las Vegas, where people like Fallon here talk about values while arming to the teeth Saudi Arabia to create mayhem, death and destruction and disease among the people of Yemen. We have Fallon talking about values while supporting every single American war of conquest and, again, death and destruction. We have the American president, Donald Trump, condemning the Las Vegas attacks as evil, while praising the most trigger-happy military on earth, and talking about annihilating North Korea. A military since World War II that has been estimated to have killed between 20 and 30 million people. Oh yeah, we're the country of values. We are. We're nice. Got those bombs ready? Yeah, okay, go for it. So when you kill people in civilian clothes, you are a mass murderer and evil. When you kill people, far more people, in uniform, you are a hero. This is the madness, ladies and gentlemen, that we have allowed to prevail. Now is the time we must say enough.